This is the future.
Hello and welcome to the Alternate Futures podcast, where we chat with indie sci-fi creators about their work, the world, and anything in between, or beyond. Today, I'm here with Daniel Sayre. Daniel holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, as well as a double minor in math and creative writing from San Jose State University. In spite of this, he tries to remain only a part-time nerd. He is a sucker for a good superhero story and loves the great outdoors, whether hiking, backpacking, obstacle course races, or just getting to see new places. He also likes pizza, spending time with friends, and playing around on his 3D printer. Cooking and spelling bees, not so much. Hi, Daniel. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, pizza, I can definitely get behind that. That's one of my favorite comfort foods. At the
Uh,
risk of offending some, what's your favorite toppings?
oh man. I mean, a lot of it I'll just take whatever I can get, but I am I have several jokes with several friends. I am solidly in the olives camp, black olives camp, specifically. I'm a bit of a carnivore, so I will take most of the meat types I can get. Anchovies don't count. Sorry, folks. Yeah, the um, I don't know. I'm pretty easily entertained. So just if there is a cheese pizza laid out in front of me, I am happy with that. And then the more bells and whistles I can get on it with yeah, pepperoni, sausage, all of that stuff. I mean, where's the problem?
Because I've
Uh,
I've always heard that California does have some strange flavored pizzas. What's the weirdest one you've come across then?
oh man,
Or is there too many to think about?
it's it's a little tangential, but it reminds me of when I was growing up, we would have tell me if this is too far out there, but growing up we'd have a make your own pizza night kind of thing, and just to prove the point, as a kid, I remember thinking chocolate is great, pizza is great. I'm gonna put chocolate chips on my pizza. This is a great plan. No one's ever thought of this. And I forgot the chocolate melts. And so there are these little chocolate pop holes in my cheese pizza. And I
Oh,
think while we were at it, for some reason, we put beans and all this other random
jeez.
stuff on it. And I think we burned it on top of it. And that was a learning experience. Too many good things in the same place might not end up as a good thing, like that. So that's not your standard menu for a very good reason. But that one definitely sticks in memory. I don't know. I mean, there are the like artichoke hearts and I mean, there's the classic debate about pineapple on there too, which
I
is
was
its
going to
own.
ask about that actually.
Yeah, yeah.
Over
That could
here,
be,
it's almost sacrilegious to put pineapple on your pizza in Europe.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
I don't know, they just really have a thing against it.
yeah, yeah. Again, I don't think I have as discerning a palate as many of my friends around me, so I am pretty happy with what I can get usually. But yeah, pineapple, it's it exists.
All
Yeah.
right. So I'll leave it there then. So you talk about only wanting to remain a part-time nerd. But you mentioned backpacking, hiking, and obstacle races. So in California, so that definitely must keep your nerdiness in check. Um,
I mean, it's still a nerd on the move probably, but yeah, my family has really loved doing outdoor stuff. I kind of grew up, yeah, doing a fair amount of that, and I think I've just kind of embraced it more as I've gone. I think a lot of it for me, and even with writing, is I spend a lot of time just walking around the block, just being outside in some way, and it just kind of resets my mind. I think for me, it's just I'm really good at spinning my wheels, kind of sitting in my own head, and it just kind of has a way of um, resetting perspective a little bit. And then, there's the whole spectrum of like going for a walk and then going for a run and then going for a distance run and then going on an obstacle course race where there's, freezing water and things to climb over. And so, you go all the way. But like I said, it breaks up working at a desk, and a lot of crazy memories from different events. But it's uh, yeah, yeah, I could go on, but it's nice to be able to live in both worlds a little bit.
yeah, I'm pretty
Uh,
impressed at the obstacle course racing, especially. What kind of lengths do you go and sort of give us some examples of the types of activities that are involved?
sure. Yeah, this is a whole history, but So the first, I'd say, real ones I did were they're called Tough Mudder. I don't know if they exist in Europe. I think
Yeah, I've heard of them over here as well. Yeah, in
okay,
England
I think
anyway.
it was partly started by a British Special Forces guy, and which makes it sound super, militaristic, which is not. But it's very focused on teamwork, on camaraderie, on overcoming obstacles together, which I think, for some again, as somebody who lives in my head a lot, has been really, really good. But those tend to be, I think the ones I've done tend to be about 10 miles or so. And, when I started, I assumed I would just run the whole way. And there definitely have been breaks. I don't just get up and sprint the whole way. But those tend to be, they also tend to focus a lot on overcoming fear, which, so they have, I mean, I mentioned that one does have like a huge like a dumpster sized ice water thing that you said that you
Okay.
jump in and you have to submerge underneath in order to get to the other side. And I don't like being cold. I think that's the one I was the most afraid of the first time I did it, just because I burn and I don't have a ton storage energy there. So it's like I burn all the calories I have running, and then I got to jump in water. Like, oh man.
No
Uh,
insulation. Yeah.
but yeah, yeah, they have some of them have like electrical shocks, which sounds like full on torture. They've done their homework. It's what is it? High voltage, low amperage, and amperage is the one you really have to worry about. So,
Right.
but it is, yeah. My sister has asked me many, many times why I do these, and like I said, I think, and I could go on to that in length, but. It uh again, as somebody who gets stuck in my head a lot, it has, I think, overcoming physical barriers, I think sometimes has helped me kind of um reset my tendency to get stuck on other types of barriers too. So anyway, to your original question, I started with a lot of with a couple Tough Mudder races, and then there are the Spartan races, which is kind of adjacent to it. I think they are now owned by the same people, and those have a 5K, I think it's a 10K, and a 13 mile, I think it's a 15K, I guess, option. And they're brilliant marketing because each one gives you a third of a medal. And so as soon as you do one, you go, oh, well, if I just do two more, I'll complete it. It's like I could go and buy little three pieces of three medals that go together, but no, I got to run, you know, uh, a lot more miles just to get this. But again, some wild memories from those. And those ones tend to be much more just endurance focused. It's not so much about the team. It's just, can you carry this bucket of gravel up a hill and back? Um, a lot of like monkey bar, grip strength kind of things. And so,
Right. Yeah, I think Netflix had recently got hold of some of the rights to put them over here as well. So I did see one of the Spartan ones recently. I
so
think World Championships or something.
oh no, I did not know about that. That's pretty cool. I could definitely see it. I know there is, I mean, when I say I do these races, like it is still a recreational thing. It's not, I'm not getting, first place or anywhere close to it. Um, but I do remember I went to the World Championships one in Tahoe. Not because I qualified. The championships were the next day, and I just happened to, do the regular race the day before. But I remember it, it's 2019, and I remember it snowed while we were on the course. And there was like thunder rolling through the valley, and it was one of the more epic and worrying things I have done as I realized that the fastest way to get back was just to keep going forward. And they started to close the course because of the weather and everything.
Oh,
So
jeez.
it was one of those, yeah, again, and they had, trucks going and like taking people off the course, but they only had so much space. So it was a very much a moment of like, wow, this is real incentive to keep going, maybe faster to get off the
Yeah.
mountain.
Prepped for
Uh,
the apocalypse kind of thing.
it like I said, it is memorable one
Yeah.
way or another.
Yeah.
Um, but
Excellent.
yeah, I could tell stories, but I don't want to.
Do you
I
find,
digress.
so I'm wondering when you're training, I mean, probably not during the competition, but when you're training, do you find that it clears your mind for thinking about writing, for example? Because when I do my exercise in the morning or in the shower even, it's just
Sure.
that sort of solitary off period where the mind starts putting together stuff. Do you find that happens?
Absolutely. I think, I mean, uh, literally probably not as much in the midst of it, but I think
Right.
after, and then you have the endorphins flowing and you're more at ease. Just, yeah, physically, I think it does. Yeah, I find that's something that really helps me think. It's just to have my routine of some kind and just, yeah, it does. Yeah, clears up a lot of the kind of mental fuzz you have going on. So
I
absolutely.
just, and we haven't got into your story yet, but it just made me think, have you ever thought of building a character around sort of an obstacle race type thing or something?
Oh, that would be interesting. Yeah, yeah, there is a character that comes to mind. I've been working on the sequel. I will lay that out here. And sort of your over the top sort of competitive type, much more so than me. Of yeah, I don't want to give too much, especially if I change it because I'm still doing edits on it. But yeah, no, it's an interesting idea.
Just before we get to writing, then I had one more question on this. You mentioned you don't like spelling bees. I can understand that. They're only really a thing in the U.S. anyway.
Or
Um,
good.
but you're not big on cooking either. Is that just the process of cooking? Presumably you like eating. So, um,
Sure. No, 100%. Yeah, I think we were talking about, making sure to not like tap the desk during the recording, a moment ago, and I think I tend to be a pretty active person at some level, and so I don't know if it's just too engaged in the next thing to like want to make really extremely intensive dishes and stuff. I tend to have a pretty lazy palate, I think, and so I'm pretty happy with pasta or chicken or rice or something like that just over and over again, rather than needing to explore a ton of flavors that take a lot of time and effort to do so. um, there is a full chance that that will change in the future. But as far as my priorities go, that just tends to be uh, my, I don't know. Yeah. Again, I have friends who are much, much um, more involved foodies than I. And I'm a little lost when it comes to, you know, check, noticing the edamame flavor inside of something.
right. Yeah. I mean, I've definitely developed an appreciation of cooking and sort of flavor profiles as I've gotten older. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't enjoy cooking. It's just, and it's not that I disrespect it or anything, far from it.
Sure.
But yeah, it's just that process. Um, it seems to take longer than I would like for the product at the time, right?
Yeah, there may come a time when I just, drop all this other stuff and I just go full, full chef. Who knows? But for now, yeah, as far as my resume of skills, it is a ways from the top, suffice to say. With you know, yeah, beyond the basics. If I can put some shredded cheese on top, we'll call it a win.
So now moving on to your writing. I mean, you do have a higher degree in mechanical engineering with a minor in math, and then you took another minor in creative writing. So you seem to have discovered at least your particular path to creativity fairly early on, much earlier than someone like me has. So what was that like? I mean, have you always wanted to write since you were young, or did you just sort of discover in university?
Oh, a good question. I think, well, I mentioned my sister, and she is the English major in the family. She actually self-published a couple books, 2010 or so. She's older than I am, and I think, she was the one who knew early on this is what I was doing, and then even if it wasn't, writing, if it was tutoring, if it was anything with words, like she just knew that was her thing. Um, I think I have a very visual mind, and so that's a lot of where the engineering came in, as I tend to picture things, in 3D and draw a lot and everything. Um, I think my dad told a lot of stories growing up, and I think that interest was there growing up. I for a variety of reasons, I figured, engineering was the way to go in college. But for my major. But as I was going through and doing all this math and very deductive analysis heavy stuff, uh, I really I think part of me wanted to keep my right brain alive. Like I have a very, again, that creative, visual side, but a very creative side. And um, there's a balance of, even in engineering, how much design and creativity you get to do versus just pure analysis. And different times in college, that scale can tip one way more so than the other. And I think in the middle of all that, yeah, I was interested. I knew I was interested in writing stories. I did not, for a very, very long time, I did not really believe that I was ever going to publish anything, I think, but just as an interest. I realized like I'm in college, I still, I have this many classes to get through anyway. Um, like this would be really cool to be able to do to do a creative writing minor on the side while I'm here. And the math minor was few enough units that it was just two extra classes by that point. So um, yeah, it was. I think the interest was already there, and it was just more the realization that I could pursue it that took me some time to kind of
Right.
build up to over time.
So let's say once you graduated university with the minor, sort of how long and what path was it till you decided to write your first book?
Oh man, another good question. I think I I mean, I took a lot of, I wrote some, ideas and thoughts and occasionally short stories or sketches, I guess it's be a better way of putting them to myself just after work with the, five brain cells I had left at the end of the day. But I think man, it's crazy that this all the way back in 2015 is when I started the initial sketches of what would becoming Glitch. Um, and again, it was after work. Sometimes I would write a paragraph in a week, sometimes less, sometimes more. And then just not really believing it was going to become a book or a published book, just a story that I thought was fun and funny, and I've again been a bit of a I don't know if superhero nerd is the right way to put it because I know there are people out there with much more encyclopedic knowledge of superheroes than I do. But I've always gotten a kick out of superheroes, and so as I wrote a lot of these sketches, and then over time they turned into a draft, and over time I edited that draft, and so it's slow building process. And I think a little bit more towards your question, I think yeah, kind of tail end of 2020, with all the stuff going on, I was talking with a friend and realized we were talking about, things we would regret. And I realized, like, I think this is, not writing a book, not doing the story that I've been working on behind the scenes for a really long time is something I would really, really regret not doing, at the end of everything. And I realized like this is something I can do when I retire, or this is something I can do right now. And so I started to kind of more actively prioritize it. And again, I think it was only in like 3 months or so before I published that I really started to get to the point of believing like, I think this book is actually going to happen. It really is actually looking like a possibility and not just a pipe dream of some kind. So
Right. Did
I
the
don't know if those two.
pandemic help you sort of kickstart you to actually that final stage of getting it out there?
In its own way, I think, I hesitate to give it credit for anything, but at the same time, no, I think that's a fair way of putting it. Just that like enforced, being forced to slow down and reconsider things was kind of yeah, a reality check for me. Of like, what am I spending my time on versus what would I regret not spending my time on? In so many words.
So are you a member of any writing groups or is it pretty much a solitary kind of thing?
Probably more solitary than it should be. And the last, leading up to publishing the book, I really didn't have. It was pretty much me occasionally bothering my sister for advice. And more recently, I think since publishing the first book, I've been backtracking over myself to realize all these things about publishing that I had no idea about that I now like everything from genre research and realizing what other books are out there that are in some way similar to mine versus just a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. And I've started, I have a Friday group now that occasionally meets online and just, write together for an hour or so. So starting to form a little bit of a writing community, not all the time, but something.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah. So presumably then, with a sister who is self-published, you didn't really consider going the traditional route, agent, etc. It was just sort of straight out into self-publishing.
Yeah, I really, that was the example that I'd seen, and my understanding kind of coming out of it, a lot of it was piggybacking off of her experience. Most of it was. But yeah, it was really, I think we're at an odd time of like, traditional publishing used to be the one and only. There's a reason it was traditional, is because that was the only way to do it. And I think, now it's much more of a weighing of the costs and benefits. Um, and for me, part of it was just some of it was that I really, the whole thing about regrets. I really wanted to just get the book published. I didn't want to, come out of nowhere, write it, and then have it sit on a shelf for, 2, 3 years to see if I could get somebody to approve it. Um,
Right.
yeah, I think that's a lot. Um,
So
yeah,
did you use your sister as a alpha or beta reader then?
yep. Kill. I had done test reading for her books back in the day and figured, hey sis,
Called in the favor or
yeah,
payback
which
time,
I
I guess it
mean,
would be.
and as I said, the spelling. I mean, thank God for spell check. But even a lot of the grammar stuff and the formatting stuff and just how to what even to look for. Amazon has a lot of resources for how to format and what they want. But even knowing what to look for and where to look for it was very helpful. Uh, yeah,
Right. What have you found, let's say, to be the easiest part of publishing your book? And then in addition to that, what's the hardest part?
oh
Other than
man,
writing, of course.
yeah, no, that's I think oh man, hardest I think I have to say is marketing. As I
Right.
said, the common ground between engineering and writing is not knowing how to market for either one. Um, the and just I'm not I have my Facebook author page. I don't love to be on social media all the time and everything. It's not something I get super excited for usually. And so just needing to figure out how much of a presence I need to maintain there, but also, that it can become an end unto itself.
Okay.
Um, that's its own, that whole thing is a continued process. Um, the best part, I think, I mean, I don't know. I think getting feedback from people who have read it, especially as the book begins to make its way into the hands of people I don't know or didn't know in the past, that and just hearing people's feedback on it was really, has been really really cool and interesting to hear, um, takes on the book that I didn't think about. It's like, oh, was this what you were going for? And like, no, but I'm happy to pretend it were.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
uh,
the just the way artists are.
yeah, just retroactive
Yeah,
continuity every time.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
So yeah, so we were talking a little bit before. We haven't mentioned yet. Your book is a superhero novel called Becoming Glitch. But I wanted to touch on before we get it sort of into the book itself. I just wanted to ask like, about the audiobook because we did discuss it a little bit before we started the recording. And I really enjoyed the audiobook. I listened through it. I thought the narrator was very good, and he especially came into his own as more characters developed. Then you could really see the range of this narrator. So what was that process like then? Sort of walk through that, and you did get quite lucky in knowing the narrator, and maybe you can talk a bit about that.
absolutely. No, I'm happy to. Yeah, the Ken is a personal friend, somebody I know. He's background in engineering as well, actually. And but he'd been taking audio voice acting classes for even before I knew him. and had been his work had had some bumpy stuff happening, and I think at the time he was between jobs, and yeah, we talked about it, and part of me was worried about working with with a friend that it can get complicated and everything, and part of me even like I like doing voices and accents and everything, but as I said, I get so self-critical. I was like, this is going to take me forever, and I'm never going to want to listen to it if I do it myself. And then realizing like he had not only the technical know-how, but the legitimate talent, not a oh, that's nice, yeah, sure. And I was like, as he started to demo some of the voices he could do and the range he had, I realized like this guy is legitimately very, very talented. Um, and yeah, so we started working on it together, and Amazon has some basic Audible has some guidelines for their basic requirements, but because I knew him, I was able to work with him much more closely and go over him with different back and forth on what do you think about the voice for this character? What if even Glitch and his audio, his narrative versus character voice, spoken versus narrating. Um, and it was very cool. It was cool to see both the voices develop and even something that took me by surprise was his interpretation of the voices. That I was picturing a very kind of narrative and then kind of cadence, I guess, and with voices to delineate who's talking. But he really took the emotion in the scene, read it, and then tried to interpret it as he went. So um, yeah, I don't know if there's anything specific that we want beyond that, but just he blew me away in a lot of ways, which I was very
Yeah.
happy with.
Well, first thing I wanted to know is, did you have to do any specific editing to move it from the print version to a sort of a readable version that would seem to flow well? Because sometimes things that work well in print, when you're reading them sort of subvocally, then when you read them out loud, they don't work as well. Did you have any of that, or was it just sort of worked right away? Because not all books have that issue, but some do.
No, good question again. I think there were a couple places, definitely. I think it was bizarre to hear my words spoken by somebody else's mouth, for one, but also yeah, I think realizing there were a couple ways that I probably could have phrased things better, especially to be spoken rather than read. And then, yeah, I think again, I tend to have a very visual mind, and so when it came to interpreting characters, I had this idea of sort of uh, somewhat what they looked like, sort of a picture of them. But when it came to hearing their voice, uh, sometimes it was clearer than others. Which it felt a little bit like directing, which is also a new experience for me. I was not sure what I was doing, but again, working with Ken made it a lot. I think easier. Just his enthusiasm and my and patience with me rolling through different ideas. Uh,
Right. And I have to ask, since you're in California and the villain has a very obvious Texan drawl, is this like intentional rivalry going on? Was that what?
I hadn't thought of that one, but I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember a little bit of how I came with the specifics for the villain. I think it was just a very. Um, I tended to think of him actually as more, and I mean Texas is southern, but more sort of like deep south, like I don't know, be like Alabama or not. I don't know. I don't know my sub accents that well, but more like your refined kind of Southern gentleman sort of idea, which Bruce, as we get into, was like the pinnacle of Texan. I looked into, I watched some videos on your classic Texan accent versus like yeah, a whole investigation.
It's possible I
Uh,
don't know the nuances of the Southern US accents either, but I
all
took it as
good.
Texan. Yeah.
I think a lot of Americans don't. But as well. But yeah, who knows? Maybe subliminally there's this. Uh,
Everyone's leaving to Texas. We gotta shut them down.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, so as we mentioned, your book, this is your debut novel, is Becoming Glitch, and it is in the superhero genre, very solidly in the superhero genre, but with some interesting differences from a lot of the, well, it's hard to say. In the novel forms, they do explore a lot more of the landscape versus the sort of movie forms and the comic book forms, which are a bit more narrow in their explanation. So I guess the elevator pitch is an unambitious college student who discovers he can freeze time and must navigate the world of superhuman abilities. Do you want to flesh this out maybe to a, I don't know, a slightly longer elevator pitch, and then we can go
Oh
into
man,
some of the details.
yeah. I think, I mean, speaking generally, like, um, it is an action adventure story. If you are interested in the superhero side of very unique powers of unexpected characters coming in when you would not see them coming. Um, just interesting, again, the engineering background, toying with some of the physics and what was possible. If that interests you, like I hope you are solidly entertained. That was very much a goal. But at the same time, it is also a story of character growth, kind of a coming of age story, even though Glitch is college age, where he starts as a kind of quirky but very kind of living in his own world, not particularly ambitious, not particularly doesn't particularly care about others that much, just sort of doing his own thing. And then by the end of the book, he's gotten to the point, step by step, by interacting with a lot of other characters, where he's willing to challenge that MO. And so it's very much living in both worlds of the action adventure side, but also a bit of the introspective side. And if either appeals, I hope it is a solidly entertaining book.
Because you mentioned the physics as well, because so Glitch in the book mentions physics a few times about how these things he doesn't understand how they can work. Have you worked out some of the physics of what they might what might be possible within the realms of these powers?
This is kind of the trick with the sci-fi is at some point, you need a one leap of grace in order to get to, if everything checked out perfectly, then it wouldn't be sci-fi, it'd be reality. And it's yeah, I realized, so the whole thing was freezing time or at least moving extremely quickly in short bursts. Somebody pointed out to me, like, wouldn't that make sonic booms every time he moves? And it's like that would completely destroy everything standing around him. And that was one of these, like, well, I was thinking like maybe you could get into string theory and maybe he's going into an alternate dimension for a very short time. That doesn't really make sense. But thinking about the physics enough to realize that certain creative liberties have to be taken. But and but still interesting. The idea like if time was frozen, uh, in theory, you wouldn't be able to burn yourself because heat transfer takes time to take place, for example.
Right. Mm.
So some of that, checking out the ideas behind some of that and some of that realizing, don't think about it too deeply. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
uh,
I wasn't quite sure. I know he did mention the sonic boom thing, so I figured someone mentioned that to you when they were reading it. But
yeah,
it
yeah.
occurred to me that effectively, if he's freezing time, he's moving, and you're basically dividing by zero, right? So it's an undefined the equation anyway. So I don't even know if sonic booms would be relevant or not. It's hard to say.
And
But
I
that's
mean, would light travel? Would he be able to see
yeah,
while time?
exactly.
And it's sort of one of those like, well, go with it.
Yeah, his power did remind me, and you mentioned online games with regards to this character, because he likes to play online games, and it's a superhero story. It made me wonder if you'd played any of the online superhero games.
There was one in particular, was the DC Universe one.
Right, okay.
Blanking on what it was called, but it was very customizable and so a little bit. I know there are a bunch. So some, but and I don't think I went into the details of what
Right.
particular type of game he was. I was pretty worried about copyright stuff, and so I was like, I don't want to mention too many specifics here, just in case there is a scenario in which somebody gets mad at me.
Yeah, and then
Um,
you'll trigger fans as well who will say, "Well, no, no, that's not right."
Sure. One of the more interesting things I found out while writing was that the term superhero was copyrighted,
Oh,
joint copyright between DC and Marvel. And so, I think I'm probably too small for them to care. But if you read like Brandon Sanderson's The Reckoner series, uh, he never uses, I don't think, the term superhero, at least in the connotation, because um, yeah, because of that, I think. So he calls them epics and made me realize some of the behind the scenes creativity out of necessity. Uh, so
okay. That
uh,
explains maybe why you start hearing terms like meta-humans and enhanced humans. Okay, interesting. I didn't realize that.
oh,
Um,
that took me by surprise. Uh,
yeah, yeah. No, one thing I was thinking about with glitches power and the online games. So I played most of the major ones. So DC Universe Online, I played. Uh, I think what the other one was Champions Online, and then the first one I played was City of Heroes. And I think that's the one that I'm thinking of where the the teleporting power in City of Heroes was sort of traveling through an astral plane for a limited amount of time, which reminded me a lot of Glitch's power, to be honest. So I was
sure.
wondering, I was just curious if you'd ever played
You
that.
know what? I had heard of it. I think it had shut down by the time I found out about it. I think by the like it is a game that I could have seen myself spending a lot of time on. But I think by the time I realized it was there, it was closing or had closed, I think.
Yeah, it's had such a fan following that they actually have independent servers for it, I think, now. But
Yeah,
yeah, no, it was really enjoyable when I played it. It was one of the, and it was very customizable. That's the beautiful thing about all the superhero ones. They're all super customizable, the characters, costumes, and everything.
absolutely.
I was wondering how much of Andy, who becomes Glitch, is based on you.
Oh man. Another excellent point. I think I've had a number of people tell me that he talks just like me, which I don't think I realized how much. Uh, I don't think that was fully intentional. But so definitely there is apparently there's a connection there. Yeah, I think I didn't want him to be just a characterized version of myself entirely, but I think every character you write has to have a piece of you in them to understand them. And kind of, everything comes from somewhere. Yeah, so I think a lot of his, yeah, even some of his internal reasoning is definitely based on reality,
I was
if not.
wondering then what you just said. Does that mean you've got some of the psychopathies of your villains inside you as well?
I hope not. Yeah, no. I it was the main villain in particular was really like odd to just sit there and go like, what would make somebody this bad tick? Like, what would drive him to just like be this even if you don't get his fully reasoned out all the details of why he does what he does. And it's yeah, no, thankfully no. But odd to again like pull out even movies or characters or whatever you've seen and just get inspiration from like um uh, even a theme of like uh and I know we talked about spoilers and I'm trying to not give too many details, but yeah, just to take a person, think about, if they've been in this situation, like um how would they respond? And yeah, to take some kind of emotion or something and to just play it up to the umpteenth degree.
Yeah,
Um,
because what was especially interesting, well, your characters, I guess we go into your characters, but I'll start with the villains because we were just starting to talk about them. Um, so you have some that have recognizable powers, but maybe you put them in different personalities that you don't commonly see. I'm thinking of the let's say the marksman character. But the main villain is actually, I think, pretty unique. And what's interesting is that, like you say, he's maybe above real life, but at the same point, his powers and his nature can be quite grounded in villains of that we have in our actual world, right? He's just a bit more of that. I quite find that character to be quite fascinating. He was very interesting. What inspired his creation then?
Yeah, no, it's another good question. I think a lot of it was, I was talking about the process of just going over it with the handful of brain cells I had over work, and just kind of the iteration of it. That I definitely did not come up with a character completely in one or two or a handful of sittings. I did a rough first draft, and then I came back and thought more about how to make him scarier, or his motivation in particular. And But I think a lot of it is, again, I'm very visual, and so a lot of it was thinking like what would be cool, what would be scary to see. Yeah, and realizing I've been talking with some people, and I think a strong villain makes a good story a lot of the time,
Mm,
or makes for a good story.
especially
And I really
superhero
wanted,
story.
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and I think having yeah, somebody who is both powerful but also cunning, um, not just some brute who thinks they can beat everybody till they can't, but somebody who pulls strings and manipulates things in ways that the hero may have no idea about for a very good chunk of the story. Um, and then also behind that has their trump card, their ace in the hole to play. Yeah, I think I don't know. I'm not sure what to say except that it developed over time.
right. So
Really.
how long did you, well, how many times did you kind of go over the story and sort of work the characters a bit better? And because it does sound like it was a bit of a process then.
Sure. My naming convention was atrocious, but the one that is out now, I think I call version 10B. And it was, I think version 4, I want to say. And again, I skipped around a little bit, but I think version 4 was the first real kind of full true draft. That I was like, hey, this actually seems like a story. There's beginning, middle, and end. Who knew?
Right.
Um, and I think by version 7 or 8, I think was when I got test reader feedback from other people. So it was definitely a process over time. And there was, I did have my sister take a look at it, kind of somewhere in the middle, and got her full feedback from it before, and then went back and took a really long time to edit, and that shelved it for me for a little bit while she was doing that.
Right. Yeah, something interesting. With superhero stories, um, I mean, when we're young, we watch or read comics or whatever. We really love the overpowered characters, right? That those are the ones we seem to be drawn to. But I think as we get older, we want we want them to be sort of toned down. We want to appreciate the challenges that they have to face rather than, knowing that that character has the power to just instantly win, more or less. And so what we see is in, say, Marvel and DC, we have characters that are pretty overpowered and they have multiple powers. And if you take, like, I got a list here I wrote down prior to this, but think of even Iron Man, who's like, okay, intelligence is his superpower, let's say, but it enables him to create the suit of armor, which allows him to do all kinds of other stuff. Even Black Widow, who's primarily trained as a super assassin, is the most human of all of them, still must have like incredible durability or something, right? Because she survives all kind of stuff that
Sure.
normal human wouldn't survive. Um, and so all of them, they have like all these multiple powers and they're overpowered. But as we get into sort of the novels, the more interesting parts of the stories are well, first off, how a character can deal with their own weaknesses, let's say, their own shortcomings, and then like the relationship between the characters as well. Ultimately, those become the most interesting things. And one of the things with your story is you've kept each character to basically one power, haven't you? So it enables them to really focus on, first of all, you have obvious shortcomings in your powers, and you've got to sort of figure out how to shore that up, right? So glitch. Uh, well, tell me if I'm telling too much, but he has basically a time limit on his ability. and
Yeah,
uh and for some reason he doesn't want to train himself either. I would assume that training you'd be able to use your power more effectively. But each of them has a weakness in their ability. Um, and so well, I'm going on a little bit here, but did so you must have presumably worked this in. Was this a conscious decision on your part to sort of keep that to a small power set as possible to enable a more of a story, or was it
yeah.
just something that happened in your development of the characters?
No, it's good. I think so. I think it was pretty. I think part of it is with the whole character development side is that if you want a character that you can empathize with, and if everybody's Superman, nobody cares. If it's as fun as it is to watch these, just untouchable beings go and kind of do whatever they want, unhindered by anybody except somebody who's at their same power level. Um, I don't know. I was kind of interested in sort of the again the developmental, the psychological side, and I think that um, yeah, it was more, I guess, accessible by people who were just kind of coming into their own and didn't have these unstoppable powers. I think in some ways, I think I was inspired a lot by X-Men, where it is like, people have these abilities, but it's also sort of about the people behind them and needing to deal with these, their unexpected mutations. Sometimes they're great and it just makes them super powerful, and sometimes there's a two-edged sword to them. I remember, I didn't get to watch a ton of superhero shows as a kid, but I remember stumbling across X-Men Evolution, I think it was. And I think the idea of like Cyclops, for example, somebody who has just extreme, like just absolutely destructive vision. But it's the two-edged sword where he can't, unless he has his special glasses on, he destroys anything he looks at.
Right.
Like that was really interesting to me. And so everybody having powers, but everybody having limits of some kind too, made them interesting to me, I think. Um,
Yeah, that is sort of where the interest comes as well. How do you overcome those limits? Um, so you mentioned X-Men, but my impression was that you went the Fantastic Four route. It seemed with the heroes anyway, and yeah, I think even the villains possibly. But that would by which I mean, okay, they had an event that they were exposed to. That's one part of it, and then also the powers that they gained were a reflection of their personalities, essentially. And what was that? Was that an intentional process?
Yeah, no, yet another good question. I think so. I like the idea that um, your power kind of comes out of an element of who you are. It reflects you in a way. And so Glitch, Andy is you know has this restless mind, is kind of constantly going in some ways, has that curiosity side, and so it seemed kind of fitting that he also has this ability to mess with time a little bit, to be going sort of when nobody else is, in a sense. Bruce by personality is a very stalwart, kind of immovable guy, and it seemed appropriate that for where he comes from, for a personality like that, he is also this nearly immovable, um, this titan of a man. But also, again, with the double-edged sword that it makes him inflexible in some ways, both in terms of his personality and in terms of what he does. Um, and yeah, more without going into detail.
Yeah, yeah. So you didn't mention Kelly, which is also one of the really sort of almost unique characters in a way. I mean, when we first were introduced to her in the story, I was wondering if she was sort of similar to one of the Marvel sort of secondary characters from the MCU, and you might know which one I'm thinking of, but clearly not. And she has a really unique, um, again, not trying to do any spoilers. So, um,
Unique or pretty
well, a
good.
unique power set and a unique way of accessing that power. I'm curious where that came from, and I'm also, since I know you're writing the next book, I'm very curious if you're going to have them develop their skill sets in new ways as well.
Sure. Yeah, that's one of the things that I need to continue working on. Actually, I got the first set of test reader feedback and um, brought back into focus is that I need to continue kind of cleaning up some of the details there. But um, yeah, again, I think it was the idea that like having cool powers that reflect the person, but also have a very real weakness to them, or the double-edged sword idea. So yeah, Kelly having being able to be um, kind of like Glitch, almost invulnerable uh, at times, but at the same time completely powerless at others. Um, just made and again, I think that kind of fit the her kind of I don't know, idealistic personality in some ways that it's all good and kind of asleep to um, some of the dangers and sometimes evil around her, but at the same time um, being I don't know somebody who through her positivity she's able to encourage other people to deal with it
Right.
in
She's
ways
like
that
the sort of teenager temporary invulnerability kind of thing.
of
As long
sorts,
as they're
yeah,
not aware of the danger, they're invulnerable, right?
yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, well put.
So I was curious, well, I guess two more questions and then we'll sort of move to the last two big questions. But um how first of all, how long is the series going to be? Do you have a plan for that, or is it just going to go till you get a
Yeah,
feel of it?
no, that's probably more so the latter. I think I have my again going back to my sister. Um, we I learned that there are planners and there are pantsers in the writing world. There are people who mark everything out, and then there are the fly by the seat of your pants. And apparently, both my sister and I fall in the latter camp.
Hmm.
So means a lot of revisions, which I would wish I could get the get drafts out faster. But I have an idea, I guess I can say, through three books, and then the question is, where does it leave me after those? But for the moment, I have a pretty good idea for a trilogy in mind. So
Yeah.
I'm gunning to get book two done this year. Again, there's a lot of work to be done, but I have a um, per my terrible naming convention, I am working on version six now of
Okay.
that, and which is probably more like version four or something, but effectively. Um, but so that one I hope will be soon, and I'm looking forward to posting more about it as soon as I have stuff nailed down for it, and then I have plans for a follow up to that.
Excellent. Yeah, one of the beautiful things about superhero stories is, I mean, well, we're discussing them in sort of the realm of science fiction, and your book falls more on the science fiction-y side of the superhero genre than it does on, let's say, the magical side. But the genre itself encompasses virtually everything. And so you can go almost anywhere, right? You'll I mean as a pantser especially, I mean you can imagine that, you'll open up new ideas as you write further on in the series, and the series can go off in all kinds of can keep going potentially with new characters and new realms and everything as well. So it's yeah, it's quite a possibility of books in the future, isn't there?
I'm excited for it, and I think as I alluded to the Reckoner series by Brandon Sanderson, and part of the reason for that is that's the only real superhero novel series that I read before writing my first book. It kind of made me realize that you could write a novel about superheroes. It didn't have to be a comic. But since then, while working on the book too, I've read a ton of other books and the in the genre, and yeah, it definitely opens up doors to realize, oh, this can be done. And even understanding, I don't want to say just the tropes, but yeah, some of the uh, stuff down the road that you might or might not run into
Right.
as you can.
And as you said, you had to be convinced that it could be done. Um, what are the challenges of marketing a superhero novel? Because as you say, we have superhero movies, superhero comics, and it's hard to judge what kind of marketplace there is for a superhero novel. I mean, I've read a number of them myself as well, but I'm not really sure how big the audience is for that.
It's not huge so far, as I've found, and that this is the kind of thing that I hope I can come back to this podcast in a year and tell myself how dumb I was because hopefully we'll have found all the answers by then.
We'd love
Um,
to see that for sure. Come
if anyone,
share them with us. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Speaking of manipulating time, but yeah, I think understanding genre and market and my readers is again it's not something I'm particularly trained at, and it's still something I'm figuring out. Um, yeah, I mean because it is such a visual. I mean, again, you think superheroes, yeah, a lot of people probably first think comics, then think Marvel movies or vice versa. Um, the fact that I didn't know that there were other novels for a very, very long time kind of shows that even people who are interested might not know that they exist. Um, and yeah, so I'd like to think that it's something that will continue to grow as more people find out about it. Um, I don't know if that's the case. I know people have talked about superhero fatigue with all the movies that have come out. Um, yeah, I think something that I hope for with the book, kind of with smaller, with the smaller powers and everything, is that it is again, it's the story about people, the kind of the sci-fi side. It's a story about people being put in an interesting situation.
Mm.
Um, and and so there's the hope that it's not, you don't just go to the book if you only want to read about people with superpowers, punching each other in the face. Um, but I think reaching that out, disseminating that, like I said, I hope future me has some great insights for this in a year. Uh,
Yeah, I think the superhero fatigue, I mean, obviously, I've heard a lot of comments about that as well. My personal view is that it's not actually superhero fatigue, it's bad superhero story fatigue, right? Because, I mean, once the MCU hit the end of the Infinity Saga, they just started pumping out stuff that was it was initially it was partly good with sort of bad endings or weird parts in it, and then it just started getting all weird and it just
oh,
started
I'm
becoming
with you.
and people
Yeah.
just were they gave up. They're just like this is you're not doing justice to this genre anymore. But had those stories been good, I think we'd still be going strong on it.
Oh, I'm with you on that. I think, again, I'm a self-described sucker for superhero stories, and I think, my interest is still very much there, not just because I wrote the book, but yeah, I think if I saw movies coming out that um, really looked interesting and it had uniqueness to them and didn't I didn't think it was just going to be kind of a cookie cutter, kind of cut and dried copy of a lot of the ones we've already seen, I'd be interested. Um, and again, I think I could make this its whole own side conversation, but I think superhero stories can hold a really important place for a lot of discussions. Like I go into the afterward. Um, it is a place where we talk about ethics a lot and right and wrong and good and bad and putting values up against each other in a way that we really that would be boring if you did it in a more conventional setting in a classroom. If you put people on the spotlight and say, what do you think about this value versus this value versus what do you think about the scene where this hero who embodies this value fought that hero who embodies that value? Were they right? Were they wrong? Was Thanos right? Was Thanos bad? But like all of these, the questions that come up out of the characters that we see get us thinking in ways that we just wouldn't be interested in if if somebody kind of proposed a very bland, theoretical situation.
Yeah, I think that's important and to realize is, the ethics make the most interesting superhero stories. And actually, that's a great segue to my next question. But um, just before that, you also kind of have to believe to some degree that heroes and villains are things. I mean, you also need to accept. You also need to have a willingness to explore the gray area because there is a big gray area. Um, but I think in order to have a compelling story, ultimately, you still do need to believe in heroes and villains. And I think maybe that's where Hollywood might be falling apart right now, because I'm
Hmm.
not entirely certain they do.
Sure. No, it is. I mean, it's fascinating. If you compare the early movies versus the movies now, it's like, with the stories as they're being written now, with the villains today, or would the heroes today be the villains of the original, the phase ones or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so as we're getting on a little bit, I move into the big questions for the end period. We've got a few questions, and in fact, my first one does deal a bit with ethics and morality. Um, so Glitch, in fact, does regularly deal with moral dilemma of whether to and how to use his abilities. Now, his main fear seems to be getting caught and experimented on by the police, etc. Um, but there is, as we just mentioned, there is an entire sort of superhero, supervillain, if that's not too trademark to use in this context, dichotomy, and it calls into the question the nature of power, what's right, and who should decide. And this was addressed a little bit in the MCU, right, with the Civil War, and more detail in the comics, the comic version of the Civil War. Oh, and also Watchmen was interesting at the end. I don't know if it's an older story, so everyone must have seen that, but Watchmen is quite an interesting ending as well. So I'm curious of your thoughts on, let's say, enhanced humans suddenly came into existence, and this sort of deals with the Civil War in Marvel as well. Is how much oversight do you think would be reasonable on such people? I mean, they are, on one hand, the argument would be they're living weapons. On the other hand, they're still human beings. And then factoring in the idea that our version of oversight in general doesn't usually work very well anyway, right? So, I mean, on the simple form, it's Iron Man or Captain America, and then but feel free to elaborate on your thoughts on that.
Sure. No, I mean my probably cop out sounding answer that just immediately comes to mind is it all depends. Um, I know I don't think I've seen a lot of episodes all the way through, but I've seen a lot of YouTube clips of what is it, the Boys series on Amazon,
Right.
and I think that's along the same lines of like, what if super people existed and they were basically unstoppable. And but at the same time, internally, they're still, selfish, flawed people like the rest of us. They're not, just because they have all these abilities doesn't mean they're any more, altruistic by nature. Um, and I guess the trick is, I mean, you know, first off, even can you control it? I think is kind of the question that that
That
show,
was kind of a follow up I
yeah,
was going to ask. Yeah.
playing with. And I mean, the Brandon Sanderson's, Reckoner series too. Um, and then, beyond that, depending on where on the scale you are, if it's just these purely unstoppable people that you can't stop, or that can't be controlled, well, good luck controlling them anyway. But if they can, and then there's is it a disease? Is it something they can control? Are they, do they automatically cause, incalculable destruction anywhere they go? And then, so I don't know. I feel like, again, it's a really interesting question, and I don't want to just cop out on it, but I feel like so much of it depends on the scenario that you end up with. And yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point too that, yeah, it's just because a something is put in place to keep them in check doesn't mean that that something is good or well thought through or effective either. Um,
And it does draw the point to the idea that could we even control them anyway? And by attempting to control them, would you not potentially inspire them to take over? In some ways, I guess that could be the Magneto story in X-Men, sort of driven to conquer the humans because of, let's say, injustices to the mutants in a way. So you could, by attempting to control them, could actually, inspire what you're trying to avoid, basically.
yeah, no, and I mean, in some ways, it makes me think of the whole, it's just the question, like, are people good? Are people bad? Um, and you know, you you think people are good, and then you see Hitler, you think people are all bad, and then you see Mother Teresa, and it's it isn't it doesn't seem like as obvious an answer as we sometimes paint it, but uh, yeah, I mean, it's a question. Even if we don't tend to get as like obvious black and white as an answer as we might want originally, like I feel like that's part of the thing with the superhero stories. It gets us to ask that and think about it some, even if we don't get the clear answer that we imagine at first.
Yeah, and I think we fall guilty quite often of putting people into, boxes of good or bad. Even some of the characters you mentioned, right? The real life characters, you dig into their lives and you're like, well, okay, we think of them as saints, but you find stuff in their lives that aren't particularly nice. And
Right.
overall, the thing you have to do is judge someone, I guess, on the balance of their behaviors, which if you're, let's say, religious, you would say, well, that's actually ultimately God's job. But and
Yeah.
how could we possibly do that, something like that anyway? Um, but it does, yeah. So yeah, I guess it just leaves me wondering, have we also uh in some ways become too dependent on government and bureaucracy to make these decisions for us, right? But then we're easily manipulated and swayed by powers as well, quite often. I think Spider-Man is one that sort of encapsulates this whole process well, right? Because he's neighborhood friendly Spider-Man. He's trying to help people, and he's got, the newspaper that's out to get him, right?
Right.
And a newspaper that he actually works for as well, which is even worse. So, so it's just, yeah, it's such a complex issue as well. You did kind of sidestep the ultimate question, though. So, from Civil War, Iron Man or Captain America, which side would you pick? I don't know if do you know which side was which?
That's true. My engineer take of just it depends. I guess I need to zero in a little bit. I think. Oh man. I mean, the movie, I really want to, stick with Captain America, I think. Just, I think he's ultimately, justified in it, it seems like. And I think, what you said, the whole, what was it, Sokovia Accords that went in that one.
Right.
You get the feeling that, like, it's, it's a move made off of a particular situation, off of, a tragedy that happens that probably won't fix anything and really ends up showing that it doesn't fix anything. It's just a gesture made to try and you know keep control on superheroes that nearly tears them apart when when Thanos shows up. um, so I tend to stick with Cap on that one.
Yeah.
But again, I guess my I guess a cop out answer is that you take the same kind of question and you put it into a different world with like I said with a Homelander in it or with
Mm.
where and I think and that's something I touched on just a little bit with the idea that if people get powers and it messes with them in some way, um, then then it does that change your answer of like if everybody got powers but went crazy, all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, you need some kind of restraint on that
Yeah, you'd
if you
definitely
can.
be trying to cure that too, wouldn't you?
Yeah, yeah. So that's I guess that's what it might default. So Civil War, Captain America. For a different scenario, we might have to mess with that a little bit
Yeah.
in so
Yeah,
many ways.
ultimately I spent a while thinking about that, because it is an interesting issue. And I went with Captain America in the end as well. I think, again, for that context at least. But even with the Homelander one, the idea that I went with was you have to trust the actions of the hero, right? So, or the person, let's say the enhanced person. So if that person has demonstrated a history of working to, let's say, the betterment of society, then you trust that character to continue. And the ones that don't, obviously you have to manage like criminals, right? Now, whether you can or not, it's a different issue, but
Yeah,
ultimately that's sort of how I took it on.
it's interesting too. One of the things that I've been realizing going into book two is I think I'm realizing I think there's three general call it subgenres of superhero stories, and one is um, kind of like becoming glitch is the heroes are pretty much unknown. Right? There's the heroes are vigilantes. They're maybe whispered about, but nobody really knows for sure. who they are. There is the like registration subgenre where you have like an official committee of heroes or something, some kind of certification board or school or something that they have to go to, and then they work with the government or as overseen by some kind of governing body that keeps them in check. And then three is like I typically consider dystopian of like, and again, that's the Brandon Sanderson one. That's the Crystal Bane has the Murder of Crows trilogy, which is a lot grittier than mine, but I really enjoyed reading. And it's superheroes showed up and everything went to pieces, and you really can't stop them. So they like, how do you adapt to something like that? So you know, I don't want to spoil where I'm going, but it's an interesting. That's been an interesting thing to realize. Is it kind of stems out of that question of how well are heroes known and how are they responded to and how well does it work?
Mm,
Uh,
yeah, that is interesting. Maybe I'll have to read more superhero novels now, or at least listen to the audiobooks
there you go.
if
There you
they're
go.
narrated as well as yours. One final question then. If you were to gain an enhanced ability, which one would you hope for and what would you do with it?
Oh man, good one. I think that the two that I've thought of, and they're always asterisks based on how they would work and everything, but he's either speed, I think would be really cool, or going like transmissibility, going through stuff would be just real. And some of it depends on if you're in a world where everybody else gets them and you're like trying to survive versus just the everyday world and what would be convenient. Teleportation would also be really, really convenient because, commute time is just gone. That would be crazy. But again, the engineer in me has to ask, could I take my clothes, for example? Because if not, that would be really, that'd be problematic. Flight would be cool, but, would you freeze? Kind of thing. So by default, I think the transmissibility just that seems like the kind of um, if you're in a world where all of a sudden everybody else has powers and you're just struggling to survive, that seems like kind of a catch-all of like, hey, if you can't touch me, you can't hurt me, I'm good to go. Speed would just be similar, but also really convenient too. I think just being able to get places. Again, flight could be really cool, but I don't know, could also be really dangerous, and there'd be kind of no way of hiding it. I feel like.
Yeah,
Uh,
you touch on a few interesting things there because as a kid, Flash was my favorite hero. But the
oh yeah,
more you think about it as you get older, you're like, okay, there's a let's go with the super speed, but then you have all these issues of wow, you know, obviously you have to deal with the friction from the air. His skin will be ripped off his body basically.
right.
So
No,
he's got
all
so all of
yeah,
these characters have to have multiple powers, as we said earlier, in order to protect them from their main power in some ways, right? Like flight, you'd have to have some way, like you said, if you get up high enough, you've got to have some way to breathe, you've got to have some way to stay warm. And Iron Man dealt a little bit like with that in the first movie with his suit.
sure.
Um, Transmissibility is an interesting one because what came to mind was um you could be framed for a lot of things, or if you walked into the wrong place, like especially as a guy, if you're going where I'm going, you
That
could get into a lot of trouble with that one.
I guess I tend to think of that as more like a survival in a world where everybody else is doing crazy stuff, but that's true. The practicality of that, and again, I think that's true. If you were the only person in the world who had any kind of superpower, and that's the one you end up with, on one hand, nobody could stop you. You could, if somebody did decide to arrest you, you wouldn't have to put up any, fight anybody. You could just keep walking, but you could also end up in some really awkward situations. So fair point.
Yeah.
Maybe teleportation would be better than
Yeah,
that.
I've dreamed of teleportation a lot. I mean, true one, not Glitch's version,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
true teleport. I've wondered if there's a way to, I don't know, alter your quantum wave function or something to allow you to, be in somewhere else in the universe kind of thing. That's the way I look at it. But obviously,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's possible. But,
I vaguely remember something from college about electron tunneling, I think it was, where it's like supposedly an electron could just pop into a different spot. But I don't think, I think Google at one point looked into like, hey, is it possible to make a teleporter? And they started and they're like, yeah, no, the, the physics just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, teleporting is one that I would love to have as well. Maybe because I'm lazy. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, again, it would be as far as convenience goes, that certainly would be pretty awesome.
Right.
And I feel like, I mean, the whole time freezing thing, and this is part of why Glitch needed the his power to work the way it did, is if you can just freeze time as long as you want, whenever you want, uh, it would be incredibly overpowered, I feel like, but it would also, I don't know, I feel like it could also get kind of boring at some point too, if you think about it, in that you can't interact with anybody at all ever when you're using your power.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
and
I'm quite curious how Glitch will develop his powers. It's cool that you gave him that time limitation. Um, I kind of hope he trains himself a little bit so maybe he can get faster during the time. But I was just remembering what I had forgotten earlier, which is with teleportation, quantum entanglement might be an interesting way of playing with that power. I don't really know. I don't have an idea of how that might work right now, but that could be an interesting way. Maybe with twins or something. I don't know.
toward awkward side effects or interesting side effects of powers,
Yeah,
Andy,
exactly.
what was that movie, the Prestige, I think, where you can teleport yourself, but you also make a copy of yourself, I think it was. So
Okay, right.
I think something about that, and just again the two-edged sword that can end up being.
Yeah.
Uh,
One
but
of the things that comes to mind with teleportation is you have to be very careful or the planet will pass you by, right?
that's true. The it's free body diagram, but like the system in which you're in. Yeah, is it absolute relative motion, or is it yeah relative to the universe? No, there are so many interesting ways you can
So many
go.
fun ways. Yeah. Maybe that's why there aren't any true teleporters. The first time they use their power, they end up in deep space or something because the planet's 25,000 miles per hour away from them by that point.
There was what did I read? Powerless, I think the first book of the trilogy. I'm forgetting the author's name at the moment. Um, but again, very like way grittier than mine, but interesting in that I think it was written 2012, I want to say. Um, but there was a teleporter character in that one who realized she just had a room somewhere that was just filled with mattresses, and she had made it because she realized at some point if she like accidentally teleported to the top of a building or something or was like falling, that was her go-to room. She just
All right.
pictured herself there, and then she could fall on 10 mattresses laid on top of each other or something,
That's
so
cool.
as to not splat. Uh, so practical teleporter tricks, right?
Yeah. That's pretty cool. I mean, there's so many ways you can go with powers and stuff, and I definitely would like to have you back when your series progresses a bit further, and we can discuss a lot more of them. I'm very curious to see what you come up with.
I appreciate it. I know, I mean, again, I know I'm being very cautious about spoilers, but I have so much I've put into the book too. I'm very excited for. Like I said, I've got some stuff to iron out about it still, but um, both characters and world building and powers. Um, yeah, stay tuned.
Well, that sounds cool. It's been great chatting with you, but it is about all the time we have. But before we go, maybe you can tell us, well, when you think the upcoming book might be available and where to find you online and if you'll be at any upcoming events.
Much appreciated. Yeah, I was shooting for September to publish. I think at the rate I'm going, it will probably be a little bit later, but I'm really gunning to have it this year. I would hope November at the latest, and I intend to post more as I have more. Um, I have, and as I said, Facebook or social media is not my strongest suit. I have a Facebook author page at the moment. I have a website, danielsayerauthor.com. Or if you just Google Daniel Sayer author, there are other Daniel Sayers out there, but most of them don't have books. Um, and you can find me on Amazon. Again, website, Facebook, all of that. And yeah, I don't have a lot of in-person events set up at the moment. I've been starting to record more podcasts, and I am happy to be heard wherever you can find me. So, thanks again for having me on. It has been a great discussion.
Well,
Uh,
thanks. Yeah, thanks for being on. I really enjoyed it. So Daniel Sayre, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much. Talk to you next time.
And thank you for listening. Information and links related to this and all episodes are available at alternatefutures.co.uk. I'm also over at Substack under Alternate Futures, where I post articles on science fiction, socio-technological issues, and futurism. You can subscribe for free or sign up for a paid account if you'd like to support the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not share it with friends, writers, and other sci-fi fans you know? And if there are any indie sci-fi creators you'd like to see featured, send me a message at podcast@alternatefutures.co.uk. Once again, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me on the next episode.
This is the future. Human error. Evolution. This is the future.